Hey, how's it going, everyone? I wanted to let you know that doing BaristaFIRE is not a bad path for retirement. Me personally, I'm choosing a different FIRE route, but in this video, I'm going to roleplay and defend the case for those who choose to do BaristaFIRE. So BaristaFIRE is a type of financial independence retire early that lets you transition smoothly from full-time work to retirement. You work part-time, typically about 20 hours a week, which helps you ease into a less stressful lifestyle while still earning money. BaristaFIRE can be beneficial if you're used to working long hours and want to gradually reduce your workload. So instead of retiring and not working at all, you'll work a part-time job and also withdraw money from your investments to cover your living expenses. Pretty simple and straightforward. Another way to look at it are the Norwegian Vikings back in the day. When they weren't going on raids and military expeditions, they were simple farmers. It's a common misconception that Vikings were constantly sailing the seas and pillaging little communities in the UK. With that said, they only beheaded monks, plundered treasure, and explored the world about 6 months of the year. So I guess we could say they were barista-fired. By the way, what you're seeing on your screen right now is a TV show called The Last Kingdom. Hands down, don't even debate with me. It is the best show about Vikings and the early formation of England. Totally worth the watch. I promise you, by the end of episode 1, you're gonna want to binge watch the entire series. Anyways, now let's go ahead and look at the numbers for BaristaFIRE. So I would say this is the stereotypical BaristaFIRE portfolio. By the time that you decide this is what you want to do, your investment portfolio is probably going to be around $600,000. Now, on average, let's go ahead and assume that your portfolio is going to grow at a rate of 8.5% year over year. When you withdraw 4.4%, that becomes your supplemental income to help out with your part-time wages to pay for the living expenses. So in this case, with $600,000, once the portfolio grows 8.5%, taking out 4%, oh, here you go, $28,000 to help pay for the bills. And after withdrawing that amount, now the portfolio becomes $622,000. And then you just rinse and repeat the cycle for the next year and on and so forth. And in a perfect world, the portfolio should be able to sustain itself because you're only withdrawing about 4% on the basis that the portfolio grows at 8% year over year. Now, on the other hand, if you can't tell by the name of this channel, I'm a dividend kind of guy. So let's go ahead and talk about the dividend route. So without having to sell any shares at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year, I would say the dividend route is an alternative and reasonable way to go in retirement. Now, to be fully transparent, what you're seeing on your screen right now, this example, it's a little aggressive because it has a 7.2% dividend yield. But instead of having to have a $600,000 portfolio like the conventional route where you have to sell shares, with this dividend route, you only need $500,000. So I broke it down into Altria, Whirlpool, CVS, and SCHD. And this is the math, numbers, data, and allocations. In the first year, you should expect just shy of $36,000 in dividends.
But what about inflation, man?
I got you. So every single year, the annual dividend payout would grow year over year because high quality companies tend to increase their profits annually. And when they have more cash on hand and they know what to do with, they give it back out as dividends. So in year 1, roughly $36,000, and year over year, just look at how the dividend income grows. And by the end of 20 years, so after 20 years, then your expected annual dividend income should be around $99,000. So before we talk about inflation, the dividend growth rate takes care of that. But as I alluded to earlier, that 7% dividend yield is a little aggressive and too much for some people's tastes and preferences. So let's go ahead and look at a lower dividend yield retirement portfolio with more realistic dividend investment choices and a cynical 7% share growth rate. So now we're looking at $600,000, just like the conventional portfolio, broken down into VU, VTI, SCHD, and Altria. And then you can look at the respective allocations on your screen. The average dividend yield is 2.35%. So in the first year, you should expect an annual dividend income of about $14,000. So with a more realistic dividend portfolio, it's not the greatest dividend income, but that's why a part-time BaristaFIRE BaristaFIRE job comes into clutch. If you make about $15,000 a year in dividends for like year 1 or year 2, and let's say you earn about $20,000 to $25,000 a year from that job plus your dividends, then when you combine all of your financial sources, life won't be too terrible. And by the time we get to like year 15, then you would have about $35,000 in dividends pouring in. And by year 20, we're looking at just shy of $50,000. For year 1, yeah, it's going to be a little rough. You're going to have to survive on instant ramen or a sack of potatoes like an Irish family back in the 18th century in the mountains of Virginia. So why would someone even want to pursue BaristaFIRE? Maybe you're watching this video and it makes no sense. Well, let me educate you. If your career path and credentials have led you into a very specific field that you dislike, BaristaFIRE offers a way to make a career shift towards a less stressful and more fulfilling quality of life. Whether it's a specific trade that required a lot of specialized certifications, like becoming an actuary, or maybe you're a plumber, or maybe you're a doctor who went through so many years of school and had thoughts of quitting the entire time, but you didn't want to let your family down, so you've been putting in 60 hours a week at a rural hospital, hating your life. And at the end of each Friday of every single week, you say to yourself, I can't keep doing this job that I hate. So whatever your situation is, you choose BaristaFIRE if you want to leave your career field ASAP and pivot to a part-time job. BaristaFIRE is a viable solution. And then of course, if you have enough money saved up, why wouldn't you? And then number 3, if you're tired of working so many hours in a single week. I mean, if you hate your job, in lieu of BaristaFIRE, you could also just keep buying lottery tickets and hope to win the lottery someday. But the odds of that are lower than Army Officer Custer's last stand against the Native Americans of the plains. So I went down this rabbit hole and I started researching about Custer, and I found out that he graduated last in his class at West Point. And apparently the dude was delusional in his capabilities on the battlefield. I'm talking about making very bold maneuvers on the battlefield. Fast forward to his last stand, his scouts were telling him that they were going to be outnumbered and advised Custer that they should avoid making contact with the Indians and making war with them. And despite hearing all of the warnings, Custer still led his troops straight into an ambush so that he could claim the glory for wiping out the Indian threat. And he went down in history for losing at the Battle of Little Big Horn. I'm telling you right now, Custer had that liquor courage going on, and I've seen it a few times in real life. Sometimes a guy can have just too much to drink, and then he ends up picking a fight with a guy that's twice his size. Maybe a Polynesian, maybe a Samoan. And consequently, he gets his balls smashed in. All that to say, for those of us that are grounded in reality, a part-time job is more sensible than winning the lottery. Hopefully my explanation makes sense. But anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the benefits of BaristaFIRE. Number 1, it gives you the opportunity to go work a job you actually want to work, a field that you are genuinely interested in, an office or a factory that you would be looking forward to on a Monday morning, instead of having the where the hell did my life go wrong thoughts during your work commutes. And to be honest, I've had my fair share of those Monday mornings where I'm driving to work and I'm just like, how the heck did I make so many mistakes to end up in this position? But anyways, regardless of how little the part-time job pays, you have your portfolio to help supplement your income. So no career field is off limits, meaning dream jobs are an opportunity worth pursuing. And number 2, if you have a portfolio that's like $300,000 or even $600,000, you're delusional if you think that's not a lot of money. Because in my opinion, if you have a portfolio above $300,000, that's FU money. And life with FU money is truly different. And I don't think everyone out here knows what FU money is. Once you have that FU money, you don't have to worry about financial consequences or job security. And if your manager or supervisor threatens you with a good time, then let them fire you. You won't lose sleep over an $18 an hour job. Does that make sense? When you don't have FU money or even an investment portfolio, you're living life like an Eastern European peasant hearing a Mongolian horde coming your way. Like what you see on the right side of your screen. Fear in your heart, because if you lose your job, you're done skis. All those benefits and stable income going right out the door, and you're going to be scrambling and scared of what's happening next. All that to say, reduced stress is a super underrated benefit, and having a big portfolio gives you power. Unlike England, when they tried to force the American colonists to pay their tea taxes without representation. The Americans shoved a bottle full of freedom right up their booty holes and picked up their rifles and showed the world what militias can really do. And I would argue showed the British unconventional warfare for the first time. And the third benefit of BaristaFIRE is that 20 hours at work means you have so much more time on your hands to enjoy your weekends. So instead of working 5 days and having 2 days off, it'll be the opposite for someone who is BaristaFIRE. That doesn't sound like a bad life, does it? In fact, if it were me, I would work Saturday and Sunday. Hear me out. I know it's crazy logic. That way I can shop at Costco at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday while everyone else is at work. And I don't have to play Mario as I maneuver my cart down an aisle and have people bump into me 6 to 7 times on a Sunday. So instead of taking the kids to Disney on a Friday, take them on a random ass Wednesday. You're going to be able to go on so many more rides and less queue times. Just a pro tip. Okay, so I think we're starting to see the benefits and the appeal behind BaristaFIRE. So now let's go ahead and talk about being a quote-unquote barista and participating in BaristaFIRE, or any other part-time job for that matter. I already know I'm going to get some angry comments for saying this, but apparently working part-time at Starbucks is chaotic, but it's also pretty fun from what I've seen on the internet. If you're working at Starbucks full-time and you're depending on those wages to sustain your lifestyle, then yeah, it's going to be stressful. But if you're BaristaFIRE and you're working 20 hours a week, then you could just think of it as a side quest, making different types of coffee, interacting with the daily usuals, and enjoying employee benefits like a free pound of coffee every single week. And I can feel your anger and your blood boiling through the screen, but please, hear me out. It's all a matter of perspective. Starbucks is not so bad. Sure, customer-facing roles can get stressful for a moment or two, but the constant stress and pressure of a middle management job in corporate America, it's a whole different beast. I'm talking about having to deal with multi-million-dollar budgets for your projects, having 10 or 12 personnel you manage, you're responsible for their productivity, and having to play corporate politics is a nightmare, especially if you've been doing it for decades. So going from that type of atmosphere to dealing with an angry or annoyed Karen and making coffee doesn't sound too bad, right? Because think about it, as an hourly employee, that's about the extent of your pressure. You're not going to be in charge of the P&L of the store. You're not going to be in charge of the supply chain, the logistics, or any of the KPIs. Your job is simply to brew the coffee and maybe to clean the toilets here and there. The best part is, let the salaried manager deal with all of those other variables. You just make coffee. And as an hourly employee, you do not take your work home with you. You put in your 20 hours at the store, and then when you're off, you're completely off. I don't know about you, but that's a good life. Because when I used to work in corporate America, even when I was off or on my weekends, I was still, quote unquote, on call. They could contact me at any moment and take me away from my family dinner for me to fix or to put out fires. So before you tell me working 20 hours a week at Starbucks is harder than being a sales director at a big corporation or a truck driver throwing down 60 hours a week, making 3,000 miles in the span of 4 days, I think it's all a matter of perspective. There's a big difference between a job that is difficult and a job that has inconveniences. Now, before I get canceled by some woke people, let me just defend myself. I don't say that to downplay the workers at Starbucks, because if you're full-time or a salaried employee, then you've got a lot more on the line and a lot more pressure. Yes, but if you are BaristaFIRE and you're putting in 15 to 20 hours a week, you've got nothing to lose. Think about it. If they fire you, so be it. You could just move on down to the next part-time job that pays exactly $15 or $18 an hour. Because think about it like this. There's a massive psychological difference between I have to wait tables full-time to support my kid, and on the other hand,
I wait tables a couple times a week for pocket money and to stay active.
So both people might work at the same job, but their scenarios, situations, and net worth are completely different. And I want to address a common common misconception. Just because the name is BaristaFIRE, it does not necessarily mean working in a coffee shop. I know someone who unknowingly practiced a form of BaristaFIRE. He retired slightly early at about age 52 or 53 and took on a part-time job at the Bass Pro Shop. It's basically a retail store that sells fishing supplies and hunting goods. And he specifically picked that store because he loves hunting and fishing whenever he can. And as a result, he loved discussing these topics with the customers because he was a subject matter expert. And he also enjoyed the store discount for employees. I think it's 15 or 20% additional off of whatever the sale price is, which, to be frank, it probably offset his earnings because he spent so much money at the store itself. But I tell that story because I believe BaristaFIRE is practical when you can find a part-time job or a side hustle that you genuinely enjoy. If you're not getting paid at all, you would still be okay doing it. But in this case, let's at least hope for $15 or $20 an hour. Because if you genuinely enjoy that job, it blurs the line between work and a hobby. So I'm going to repeat it again. Just because it says BaristaFIRE, it does not mean you have to work at a coffee shop. Stay with me. I'm going to give some examples right now. So that job you've been eyeballing for the past 20 or 30 years, but you've always been too afraid to make the jump because it pays too low, well, fear not, because with BaristaFIRE, it becomes a possibility. So some ideas that I want to throw out there. Number one, you could work at a museum and be a tour guide. Think about it. You spend all those hours digesting history books and podcasts, so you might as well get paid to tell stories at a rate of $15 an hour to a group of 20 Chinese tourists who are curious about the dinosaur that you see on the right side of your screen. Or number two, you could be a photographer with your cheap little Sony flip phone and have a very niche little market towards millennials that grew up taking selfies on their Motorola Razr. Actually, that doesn't sound like a half bad business idea. But anyways, number three, you could also work at your local Old Navy, folding clothes like an 18th century woman before they were recognized as equals to men. Let me just pause right here. I don't care what your opinion is on the matter. Isn't that a wild idea that for a majority of history, women were second-class citizens, which in the lens of 2024, it's an outrageous idea. Because based on my life experience, women are better than men in just about everything and anything. Yes, I truly believe that. Except the physical stuff, of course. I think we're much stronger and faster than them. With that said, it's only a matter of time before women rule the world, and us men will be chained up as mules for them, to carry heavy groceries out of the car, to be their servants, and to massage their feet, even if it smells like a bag of ass. And the last BaristaFIRE idea that I have is maybe you could work at a meat butcher. You will quickly find out that every part of the cow gets eaten, depending on the culture. But I will say this, God bless the souls of every Vietnamese person out there, because pho, which is a beef noodle dish, my goodness gracious, so good. And by the way, if you want a recommendation on what to eat next time you go out, go on Yelp and look for the closest pho restaurant in your area. Spelling is PHO. I am telling you, man, delicious. And if you don't know what pho is, it's a beef bone broth with rice noodles and cilantro, and it's just so good. Or I guess you could just stick to your usual disgusting Applebee's, which, by the way, used to be good, but I don't know what's happening in Applebee's. Anyways, some of us think when we retire, we're just going to do leisurely activities 7 days a week, every single week for 12 months a year. But the reality is, retirement looks different for every person. During my MBA, we had something called the Executive Partners Program. These were folks that used to be vice presidents and CEOs of major corporations that had retired but found golfing 40 hours a week to be boring. So these retirees volunteer 10 to 15 hours a week to mentor us MBA candidates. Which I'm telling you right now, those executive partners, wealth of knowledge. I did my MBA at the College of William & Mary, and I had a fantastic experience. But anyways, this is not a video about my MBA. So BaristaFIRE is not just catered towards those that hate their jobs or careers, but to this other crowd, they find retirement too mundane. And outside of the context of my MBA experience, I've encountered individuals who amass substantial savings. I'm talking like $3, $4, $5 million. Yet, They continued working to stay engaged. Case in point, I had coworkers that were millionaires, but they still worked and grinded week after week. These are the same type of people who feel that life will be boring without a job. This might not be my opinion, but I'm just sharing their perspective. But I understand where they're coming from because I experienced a period like that in my youth, and the lack of structure and purpose was detrimental. I was bored out of my mind and was always getting into trouble. So for some people, having responsibilities and a daily routine is essential for their well-being, because when they have that schedule, it helps them to maintain a regular sleep schedule and to fulfill that sense of purpose that we all want and need. Now, of course, you can engineer a life full of routine and schedule without working, but a part-time job holds you accountable so that you don't become a fat slob in retirement that gets sucked into conspiracy theories. And on that note, I am going to give a shout out to those of you that were passionate about aliens and UFOs before they were verified, because they were absolutely correct. It still boggles my mind that the government has confirmed that UFOs are real. Like, my goodness. And after hearing everything, you might still find the audacity to beg the question,
Why not just work 5 more years so you don't have to do BaristaFIRE and work 15 more years until you can retire? It just makes no sense, George. Explain it to me.
That's actually a genuinely good call out. So I'm going to try my best to answer it from the perspective of BaristaFIRE. Number one, some people hate their chosen career fields, and pivoting to another high-paying field is sometimes impossible based on external circumstances, family situation, etc. So with that said, with their chosen career field that they despise, the stress, work politics, management pressure, being pulled in all directions, terrible boss, etc. is enough for them to say, you know what, I'm done. I'm just going to do BaristaFIRE. And number two, they get an opportunity to figure out a routine in retirement. Working 20 hours a week gives plenty of time left over to figure out what comes next. Going from working 60 hours a week to 0 sounds good in theory, but for some, that's an extreme pivot. So BaristaFIRE is a good way to ease into retirement for good. And number three, straight up fire. When you actually retire and don't work at all, it can be isolating, lonely, and your social circle is going to diminish because not many folks that are around your age will be retired. They're going to be working until they're like 62 or 64 because that's the traditional retirement model here in America. So your friends, neighbors, and church members, they're not going to be able to hang out with you at 10 a.m. or at 3 p.m. because your friends have work. So 20 hours a week at Starbucks or at Home Depot will feed your social needs. And number four, there's a mental health benefit to being productive and working a few days a week. It's different from doing errands and household chores. Being a cog in a big machine where you're contributing towards a bigger effort, it has a satisfying feeling to it. If you're an entrepreneur and you're working hard on your own craft or service or business, you get the same high. You get the same picture. And number five, with BaristaFIRE, you work a job that you actually want to do. How many times do I have to say that? Money be damned. If you are BaristaFIREd, it's not going to matter if you're being paid $15 an hour to do work that you actually love or enjoy, because your dividends are going to be pouring in, or you're going to sell some of your portfolio shares to pay for the bills. And number six, this is not applicable to everyone, but if you fire completely and you have kids, what kind of influence do you want to paint? Let's say that you're 41 years old and you're home all day in your boxers, just watching TV, playing video games, and listening to podcasts. So perhaps working a few days a week will show the kids the embodiment of grown-up responsibilities and the nature of labor. That way they can learn the lesson of hard work and grit to reach whatever goals they have in life. And because you're not going to be home all day every day, this is going to balance the quality time that you have with your family and time at work so that your entire world doesn't revolve around the kids. One of the saddest things that I see in the adult world is when, for a parent, their entire personality and life revolves around their children. Like, the parent has no hobbies, no passions, no loves, nothing. Their life is just about their kids. And I just feel like to be an effective parent, you also need your own life. Your whole life can't be just about about your kids. But what do I know? I don't have kids, so I don't know. So here's your outro so you can pull your pants back up and get ready to wipe if you've been watching or listening to this on the toilet. BaristaFIRE makes a lot of sense to me. But with that said, I'm still a fan and on the path for Coast.FIRE instead. If you don't know what Coast.FIRE is, or if you want to know my logic and reasoning, then watch the video that I made about Coast.FIRE. Anyways, this is irrelevant to the video, but these days, I've been completely nerding out to American pioneer history and learning about the various Native American tribes and stories. I'm about halfway done reading a book called Empire of the Summer Moon, and it's about the Comanches. I'm not really a book type of guy, but man, it's hard to put that book down. Page after page, I'm just so fascinated and intrigued. And after I finish soaking up all of these historical lessons on our past, I'm going to do a deep dive on the Mongolian Empire because I think too many people hype up the Roman Empire, and then these exact same people disregard how the Mongols almost conquered the world. So I kind of want to learn about their empire, their military expedition, and how they were able to achieve what they did, because I know about their downfall, but I don't really know about their rise to dominance. And the reason why I'm getting so involved with history is because I'm trying to develop a better sense of humor and incorporate historical references rather than my usual, body parts of like sweaty nipples, buttholes, and everything. I just want to mature a little bit in that regard. Anyways, let me know what you think. Do you like BaristaFIRE? What do you think about me working on my sense of humor? If you decide to answer or not to answer, I hope you have a good rest of your day. And I'll talk to you next time. Stay safe. Bye-bye.